Just after midnight, a chilling urgency rippled through the silent halls of Buckingham Palace. Princess Anne had invoked a rarely used royal safeguard, an emergency clause buried deep within the monarchy's unwritten constitution. Her demand was clear: an immediate vote to strip Queen Camilla of her title. The reason behind it shook every royal household to its core. For centuries, this mechanism had existed in theory, a fail-safe reserved for moments of absolute crisis. Few believed it would ever be called upon. Yet here was Anne, firm and unflinching, daring to act when no one else would. Known for her relentless commitment to service, Anne's loyalty was never to individuals but to the crown itself. She had always been the one to face storms head-on, not to let them fester in silence. Still, this was a step into uncharted territory. Confusion and dread filled the palace corridors as senior aides were dragged from their beds to prepare briefing documents. Cars were dispatched in haste to summon royals from Windsor and Sandringham, all without explanation. The king's private secretary moved briskly between offices, phone in hand, face set in grim determination. Junior staff whispered nervously, their unease fueled by the absence of answers. Whispers soon pointed in one direction: Camilla. Something she had done, something grave, had crossed an invisible line. Rumors spread like wildfire, a breach of trust, a betrayal Anne could not forgive. No details surfaced, and those closest to the princess kept their silence, intensifying the sense of impending upheaval. The air itself seemed heavier that night. This was no family quarrel or passing disagreement. It was a fight for the monarchy's survival. Anne's summons carried the weight of history. Her action meant to shield the crown from irreparable damage. And yet, beneath her iron resolve, there was something more, something painfully personal. A wound from long ago had been reopened, one she could no longer ignore. In truth, Anne's decision wasn't only political. It was history demanding justice, and she was the only one willing to answer the call. It was more than political. It was profoundly personal. And it all began with something long buried in silence. Behind the heavy doors of the palace, a discreetly guarded envelope was handed to Anne. What lay inside would unleash a crisis so immense that even the king himself would be powerless to contain it. This was no ordinary letter. Hidden deep within the Windsor archives, it had been shielded from both public scrutiny and the eyes of most within the family. Stamped with the unmistakable seal of Queen Elizabeth II, used only for matters of the utmost sensitivity, the envelope had remained untouched for decades. Few even knew of its existence, and fewer still dared to disturb it. But in the wake of rising unease and whispers of betrayal, it had resurfaced. And now, it was in Anne's hands. The moment she broke the wax seal, her world shifted. The letter was unlike any she had ever received from her mother. There was no warmth, no familiar comfort, no personal reflections. Instead, the words were sharp, measured, and unsettling. They warned of the dangers within, of those who, while appearing to serve the monarchy, were in truth serving only themselves. Anne read and reread the letter, each word weighing heavier on her heart. This was not casual advice. It was a warning, urgent, deliberate, and unmistakable. Suddenly, fragments of the past months snapped into focus. Small changes in protocol, private audiences quietly absorbed into Camilla's orbit, and advisors once relegated to the sidelines now exerting disproportionate influence. Even ceremonial duties, once carefully balanced across the family, had been redirected in ways that left Anne uneasy. Piece by piece, Camilla had been drawing the threads together, weaving a web of quiet power. Now, with her mother's words burning in her mind, Anne could no longer dismiss these shifts as coincidence. She recalled one of her last private conversations with the late Queen, an exchange that now took on new meaning. The room had been hushed, the Queen's tone deliberate, her gaze steady and unflinching. "The future," Elizabeth had said, "must remain untainted." At the time, Anne believed it was a reminder to shield William and his children from the turbulence that had haunted the family for years. But now, in light of the letter, she saw the truth. It was a coded charge, a warning to act if ever the integrity of the crown itself was at risk, even if the threat came from within. Holding that letter, Anne knew with chilling certainty that her mother had foreseen this moment. Camilla's quiet maneuvers were not merely unsettling. They were a direct betrayal of the trust Queen Elizabeth had sworn her family to protect. This was no longer about personal animosity or palace politics. It was a violation of the very foundation on which the monarchy stood. Anne could feel her pulse quicken, a fierce clarity taking hold with every breath. The letter was no mere artifact of her mother's wisdom. It was a directive. To honor it meant stepping out of the shadows. She would have to act openly, decisively, and without regret. The path was clear. Whatever fractures it caused within the family, whatever fury it stirred in the public, Anne knew there was no turning back. The threshold had been crossed, and her mother's words had illuminated the way forward. What came next turned quiet suspicion into undeniable proof, setting the stage for a confrontation that could shake the monarchy to its core. To the world, Queen Camilla projected warmth and loyalty, the image of a dutiful consort beside Charles. But within the palace walls, her hand was guiding far more than ceremonial matters. Piece by piece, Camilla was inserting herself into affairs traditionally reserved for the sovereign. Foreign briefings, state planning, even delicate internal communications began to carry her quiet influence. What looked like harmless participation was, in truth, a careful campaign to expand her authority. Anne, with her instinct for spotting threats before they fully surfaced, recognized the pattern. Royal advisers who once reported exclusively to the king now held private meetings with Camilla. These were not idle conversations but calculated strategy sessions, and those attending were often figures resistant to William and Catherine's vision of a modern monarchy. The more Anne observed, the clearer the picture became. Camilla's goal was not to bolster Charles. It was to reshape the monarchy itself in her own image, securing a power base that would outlast any single reign. Her tactics were subtle but effective. Through royal charities, she extended influence into local politics under the guise of benevolence. Invitations to high-profile events were meticulously curated to win over regional leaders who could shift public sentiment. Patronages and grants were steered toward allies, creating a quiet but loyal network tethered to Camilla's prominence. Even inside the household, the balance was shifting. Staff once fiercely devoted to Charles began drifting toward her camp, drawn by the rewards she handed out, prestigious roles, titles, and honors that elevated their stature. But the most alarming signal came when Anne noticed a redistribution of ceremonial duties. Engagements long entrusted to William, Catherine, or senior royals were subtly reassigned to Camilla's circle. Official explanations spoke of scheduling or representational balance, but the intent was clear. Individually, these changes might have seemed insignificant. Together, they revealed a calculated strategy, an intricate web of control, slowly tightening around the monarchy, strand by strand. The true breaking point came suddenly, and by mistake. A confidential memo, never meant to reach Anne, was accidentally forwarded to a staffer loyal to her. Its contents left no room for doubt. It outlined, in cold and bureaucratic terms, a plan to secure the Queen Consort's role far beyond the current line of succession. This wasn't about supporting Charles. It was about preserving Camilla's power no matter who inherited the crown. Anne read it once, then again. Each sentence steeled her resolve. What had once been whispers and suspicions was now documented fact. A quiet coup was underway, and subtle warnings or discreet conversations would no longer suffice. Camilla's network was too entrenched, her influence too far-reaching. This was not a private quarrel. It was a direct challenge to the future of the monarchy itself. Confrontation was no longer optional. It was inevitable. That confrontation erupted not in a council chamber, but at a family luncheon in Windsor. What was intended as a small, intimate gathering, a carefully staged show of unity, turned instead into open conflict. At first, the meal was civil, but staff watching from the edges noticed the shift almost immediately. The polite small talk thinned, replaced by sharper tones. The tension that had been building for weeks finally snapped. What began as a discussion over schedules escalated into something far more explosive. Anne's voice, steady but edged like steel, cut through the room. She accused Camilla directly of exploiting her position, of undermining the natural succession, of twisting the monarchy toward her own permanence rather than supporting it. There was no ambiguity, no careful phrasing. It was an accusation laid bare for all to hear. The silence that followed was suffocating. Those present later described it as the kind of stillness that grips a room when no one dares move. Camilla did not deny the charge. Instead, she countered, cold, unflinching. She cast herself as the monarchy's indispensable anchor in an uncertain age, suggesting that without her, the crown would falter. Her gaze locked onto Anne's, her words less a defense than a challenge. At the head of the table, King Charles sat paralyzed, torn between the two dominant forces in his life. Witnesses recalled his hands tightening on his silverware, his eyes darting helplessly between his sister and his wife. He searched for words to calm the storm, but none came. This was not his battle to control. Anne pressed again, her voice low but final. "This is not about you, Camilla. This is about the crown, and it will endure without you." The statement landed like a hammer, a line of no return. Then, in a move heavy with symbolism, Anne rose. She left her plate untouched, her chair sliding back in deliberate silence. Walking away from the king's table without dismissal was no small gesture. It was an unmistakable declaration of war. The facade of family unity had shattered. By nightfall, the fallout had engulfed the palace. The Privy Council was drawn into crisis. In his private chambers, Charles faced the most impossible choice of his reign: stand by the woman he loved, or protect the crown entrusted to him by his mother. Camilla was no longer just his wife. She was now the fault line on which the monarchy itself threatened to break. She had been his companion through decades of storms, standing with him under the harshest scrutiny, sharing in his most private burdens. But Anne's accusations could not be brushed aside. They weren't mere suspicions. They were backed by patterns that, if ignored, could alter the monarchy's destiny. Charles knew the dilemma too well. To defend Camilla without reservation could mean betraying the sacred oath he had made to protect the crown. Yet to side with Anne would risk shattering his marriage beyond repair. In hushed meetings with his most trusted aides, Charles admitted the depth of his fear, not just of scandal, but of the kind of backlash that might cripple the monarchy's already fragile reputation. "One wrong step," he confessed, "and we invite chaos." The institution had endured scandals before, but open conflict between its most senior figures was a danger unlike any other. Alone in the late hours, his mind wandered back to his mother's final counsel, words spoken with a calm that now seemed almost prophetic. Elizabeth had urged him to treat the crown as a trust to be preserved, not only for himself, but for the generations after him. She had warned, with quiet gravity, that personal happiness might one day have to be sacrificed for duty. At the time, he thought it general wisdom. Now he feared she had foreseen this very moment, when his devotion to Camilla would clash directly with his role as sovereign. The presence of William and Catherine only deepened the weight of his decision. Though they remained silent publicly, their steady alignment with Anne's position was unmistakable. They weren't simply taking sides, they were protecting the line of succession that would one day rest on their shoulders. Their stance reminded Charles that this was not only about his reign, but about the monarchy's survival into the future. In desperation, he considered postponing the emergency vote. Perhaps if tempers cooled and the media storm passed, there might be room for reconciliation. But even as he entertained the thought, he knew the risks. Delay could be read as weakness, as an unwillingness to confront the crisis. And perception, in a monarchy, was as powerful as tradition. The lessons of history pressed down on him. He had studied every scandal, abdication, and betrayal. The message was always the same. Hesitation was fatal. The crown could weather controversy, but it could not endure paralysis. Action was required, and soon. But outside the palace walls, time had already run out. The story had broken. By sunrise, headlines blared of rebellion within the royal family. The nation was awake, restless, and dividing itself into factions. Broadcasts across every network dissected Windsor's turmoil, and the monarchy's struggle had spilled into the open court of public opinion. Princess Anne's call for an emergency vote to strip Camilla of her title detonated like a bombshell, one no palace press team could hope to contain. Television networks pivoted instantly, running non-stop coverage with royal experts and political analysts scrambling to explain what could have prompted such a dramatic and unprecedented move. Within hours, newspapers across the country were gone from shelves, their front pages dominated by bold headlines and unflattering images that cast the moment as the most explosive royal crisis in decades. Public opinion split sharply. Early polling revealed a deep divide. Supporters praised Camilla's years of loyalty and steadying presence beside Charles, while traditionalists rallied to Anne's side, insisting the monarchy's honor and the late Queen's legacy must not be compromised, even for the King's wife. The mood shifted by the hour as fresh leaks and speculation surfaced. Social media turned into a war zone. One set of hashtags demanded Camilla's immediate removal, while others accused Anne of overreach. Influencers, pundits, and politicians all seized on the chaos, tailoring their takes to their audiences. Old clips of Anne and Camilla at public events resurfaced, dissected in slow motion by amateur sleuths who claimed to see years of veiled resentment in their body language. By the end of the day, the private dispute had spiraled into a national fixation. Outside Buckingham Palace, the clash spilled into the streets. Protesters gathered in swelling crowds, some hoisting signs that read, "Protect the Crown," others declaring, "Stand with Camilla." Voices rose against one another in dueling chants, the palace gates becoming a fault line for public anger. Police moved in to contain the unrest, wary of how quickly the atmosphere was turning volatile, even as bewildered tourists were swept up in the spectacle. Meanwhile, former palace insiders flocked to television studios, eager to feed the frenzy. Some claimed Anne and Camilla's animosity had simmered for years, visible in subtle slights and cold silences at family gatherings. Others argued their relationship had once been cordial, and that only recent events had poisoned it, making the rupture even more shocking. Regardless of the truth, every anecdote was treated as a clue, each one fueling the narrative further. And the drama was no longer confined to Britain. Across the Commonwealth, leaders and citizens voiced unease, questioning what the turmoil meant for the monarchy's stability. International papers portrayed it not just as a feud between two powerful women, but as a battle over the future of the crown itself. In nations where Republican movements had been gaining quiet momentum, the crisis was held up as proof that the institution was fractured beyond repair. The crisis had broken its walls. It was no longer just a palace scandal, it was a global spectacle. As headlines blared and commentators across continents dissected every move, the monarchy could no longer treat this as an internal dispute. The battle lines had been drawn, the stakes had never been higher, and the outcome could not be foretold. While the world argued, the royal family braced for judgment. In one of Britain's most closely guarded rooms, the gilded chamber where centuries of history had been shaped, the fate of Queen Camilla's title now rested on a single vote. The atmosphere was suffocating, heavy with protocol and tension. Even the most seasoned royals felt the weight of it, their posture stiff, their silence thick. The emergency council had been invoked under an ancient clause rarely used, demanding absolute secrecy and granting authority only to a select few with the power to steer the monarchy's course. The grandeur of the setting masked the gravity of what was unfolding. This was no pageant. It was a reckoning. The rules left no room for ambiguity. Every council member would hear the arguments, withdraw to deliberate, and cast a final, irreversible vote. No abstentions, no postponements. Whatever was decided here would echo far beyond the palace gates. Anne rose first. Her words were sharp and deliberate, forged not for drama, but for consequence. She spoke of the irreparable harm the monarchy would suffer if personal ambition were allowed to overshadow duty. She invoked her mother's legacy, the late Queen's steadfast defense of the institution's dignity, and warned that to ignore this danger was to betray that sacred trust. Her tone never faltered, but the conviction in her voice carried unmistakable weight. This was not just an argument. It was a warning, rooted in her bloodline and her duty. When Camilla stood, her answer was calm, yet laced with defiance. She cast herself as the victim of envy and palace intrigue, unfairly maligned for the role she had worked tirelessly to fulfill. Anne's accusations, she argued, were nothing more than personal grievances dressed up as concern for the crown. She reminded the council of her sacrifices, her years of loyalty, and her belief that she had always acted for the monarchy's survival. Her eyes swept the room, unyielding, daring anyone present to doubt her. The chamber held its breath. Each word spoken carried the weight of history, and the monarchy's future balanced on the edge of a single decision. Every pause seemed to stretch into eternity, heavy enough to splinter under its own strain. Eyes flickered across the chamber, but few dared break the silence. This was not a matter for negotiation. It was absolute, an all-or-nothing reckoning. When the time came to cast votes, it happened in near total quiet. Each declaration landed with the weight of a hammer blow, final and irrevocable. The tally was painstaking, every scratch of the clerk's pen slicing through the silence. With each mark, the chamber edged closer to a verdict that would shape the monarchy for decades. And then, at last, the result was spoken aloud. But the reaction was nothing like anyone had imagined. The decision struck like thunder. The monarchy itself seemed to quake beneath it. There were no cheers, no sighs of relief, only stunned gasps, the muffled sound of someone fighting back tears, and the stoic stillness of those unwilling to betray their shock. All eyes turned to Camilla. She sat rigid, her face unreadable, holding herself together by sheer force of will. Then, without a word, she rose. Her exit was steady, deliberate, almost regal in its restraint. She didn't glance at the cameras waiting outside, nor acknowledge the barrage of questions that followed. She simply vanished into the palace's inner corridors, leaving behind a silence far louder than any statement. Anne remained seated, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. There was no smile, no outward display of victory, only a quiet sense of duty fulfilled, tempered by the knowledge that this triumph had torn the family apart. She had acted for the survival of the crown, but in doing so, she had carved a chasm that might never be bridged. Finally, the king's voice broke the silence. His words were formal, measured, the tone of a sovereign acknowledging the council's will. Yet beneath the composure lay unmistakable grief. It was the grief of a man who had just witnessed the woman he loved stripped of her place, and who knew that to defy the decision would mean betraying the very oath he had sworn. His statement was brief, balanced on the knife's edge between dignity and heartbreak, an attempt to steady the monarchy even as it bled. In the hours that followed the vote, It was William and Catherine who stepped forward to steady the monarchy's fragile image. Their appearance was staged with care, yet beneath the choreography there was a genuine resolve. They spoke of unity, of service, of the future they hoped to build together. To the watching public, they became the embodiment of stability, two figures projecting continuity at a time when the monarchy seemed most uncertain. But those closest to them knew the truth. Behind the polished statements and graceful smiles, they were holding together an institution shaken to its foundations. The question loomed unspoken. Could the monarchy endure such a wound? The unity it had always projected outward now looked more like a delicate illusion, one that could splinter at the smallest crack. Former allies had turned into rivals. Trust had become scarce, a commodity too costly to spend lightly. And as the palace grew quiet and its lights dimmed, a final revelation surfaced, one that would alter everything. Whispers began to spread of a sealed document, locked away in the Queen's private archives. For days, palace staff dismissed it as rumor, but then a senior archivist, long regarded for his discretion, confirmed its existence. It was a file prepared by the late Queen herself, marked for release only in the event of a constitutional challenge regarding the role of the Queen consort. Few had ever believed such a safeguard would be necessary, until now. When the document was finally read aloud to those permitted to hear it, the effect was immediate and devastating. In clear, unequivocal language, Elizabeth II had set a condition. Camilla's title was to remain provisional, dependent entirely on conduct that upheld the dignity of the crown. This was no suggestion. It was not a gentle note of guidance. It was a directive, firm, binding, and absolute. With those words, Anne's controversial action was transformed. What hours earlier had seemed like defiance or vendetta was now seen as duty fulfilled. Her critics, who had accused her of jealousy or overreach, suddenly found themselves silenced. Even skeptics who had questioned her timing now understood. Anne had not acted out of impulse. She had carried out her mother's explicit will, honoring the monarch they had all sworn to serve. The letter, hidden away until that moment, had become her strongest ally, Elizabeth's voice echoing from beyond the grave with the authority only she could command. For Camilla, the fallout was shattering. Though she remained at the king's side as his wife and a royal in name, she was no longer queen consort. The title had been stripped away, leaving her presence forever marked by the weight of that demotion. Every future appearance, whether at state occasions, private audiences, or charitable engagements, would be framed by what she had lost. She was bound to Charles by marriage, yet separated from the authority and stature she once wielded. The monarchy itself emerged from the ordeal both scarred and, in some ways, fortified. To traditionalists, the enforcement of the late Queen's directive was a powerful reminder that the crown stands above any single person. Even the highest titles, they argued, were not beyond accountability. But to the public, the spectacle left wounds. The carefully maintained image of royal unity had been pierced, replaced by a raw awareness of deep internal divides. The mystique was gone, and in its place stood a family revealed as fractured and fallible. Still, the sense lingered that this was not the end, but the start of a new chapter. From this point forward, every move by the senior royals would be judged against the standard set by that sealed document. Elizabeth II's words had not only determined Camilla's fate, they had set a precedent that could one day be invoked again. And so, in a single night, the monarchy was reshaped. Not by coronation, not by tragedy, but by the resolve of a princess who refused to remain silent. They say some truths are never meant to be spoken aloud, but what if they're written down, hidden right in front of us? Deep within the quiet halls of Balmoral Castle, Princess Anne stumbled upon something no one expected. Behind a drawer in an old jewelry box that once belonged to Princess Diana, she found a note. This note stirred up memories, reopened old wounds, and brought tears to the most composed royal of them all. It wasn't meant for the public, nor was it meant to be found, but it was. And what Diana had written inside changed everything. The discovery began with a simple, unplanned detour. Princess Anne had been searching for a set of old sketchbooks her father had stored at Balmoral. The attic corridor hadn't been touched in years. The paint was peeling and dust covered the brass doorknobs. It was the kind of forgotten space nobody needed anymore but couldn't quite let go of. Anne stepped into the room slowly, the wooden floor creaking beneath her boots. Soft light filtered through a narrow window, casting shadows across old trunks and furniture draped in white sheets. One small dresser stood uncovered, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. There was something about it that made her pause. When her hand brushed the drawer, a flicker of memory stirred. This room had once been Diana's refuge during summers at Balmoral, a quiet escape from the noise and tension. Anne had thought everything had been cleared away after Diana's passing. But here it was, a small rosewood jewelry box, quietly coated in dust, unmistakably Diana's. Anne hesitated before opening it, not from fear but out of reverence. She lifted the lid slowly. The velvet lining inside had faded with time but still carried the faint scent of Diana's favorite perfume, roses with a hint of jasmine. The box wasn't filled with jewels or treasures, just a single sapphire ring, an antique brooch, and a silver hairpin. Beautiful, yet ordinary in the royal context. Then Anne noticed something unusual. The velvet lining wasn't fully fixed down. It had been gently lifted at one edge, not enough to be obvious, but enough to suggest something was hidden underneath. Curious, Anne slipped her fingers beneath the lining and found a neatly folded cream-colored envelope. It bore no seal, no date, only 4 words handwritten in Diana's unmistakable script. To my sons and her. Anne's breath caught. Time seemed to stop as the weight of those words settled on her. She sat down on the edge of a trunk, holding the letter carefully in both hands. It wasn't just the handwriting that stunned her. It was the meaning behind it. Diana had written this knowing it might someday be found, but perhaps not by her. Anne looked down at the note again, uncertain whether to open it. A flood of memories surged. Quiet conversations long forgotten, exchanged glances at tense family gatherings, moments when Diana's eyes spoke louder than her words. Now, years later, a whisper from the past arrived on a folded piece of paper. Anne finally unfolded it. The ink was still vivid. The opening line tightened her throat. This wasn't merely a message. It was a secret that had waited patiently for years, hidden beneath velvet and the scent of roses. And Anne was the one who found it. To my sons and to her. She stared at those words again, her eyes tracing the uneven ink. To my sons and to her. The phrasing unsettled her. It was vague, haunting. Who was her? And why had Diana separated that person from William and Harry? The uncertainty squeezed Anne's chest like a tightening rope. She turned the envelope over, hoping for another clue, but it was blank. Only the softness of the paper hinted at the care with which Diana had chosen it. Taking a deep breath, Anne opened the letter. The first line hit her softly, like a voice from the past. If you're reading this, it means something I feared has come to pass. I've been silenced in ways I never imagined. Anne's fingers trembled. The words weren't dramatic. They were raw and aching. It was as if Diana had written them late at night, with no one else to confide in. To William and Harry, if this reaches you, know that I loved you more than my own breath. And to her, you who found this, know that I trusted you to understand what others never could. Anne's breath caught. Her? Did Diana mean her? It was true they hadn't been close in the usual way. Anne was reserved and duty-bound. Diana, emotional and instinctive. Yet there was an unspoken bond between them, especially during moments when both felt isolated by the royal machine. Anne had seen the fractures in Diana long before the world did, and Diana had once quietly told Anne she admired her strength, a strength that needed no applause. The letter went on. There were things I could never say aloud, not to the press, not even to my sons. But I needed someone inside the family, someone untainted by titles or tradition, to know the truth. If that person is you, then I pray you guard what I'm about to share with your life. Anne's chest tightened. A cold stillness filled the room. This was no longer just curiosity, it was a heavy responsibility. This note wasn't left to spark scandal. It was a vault Diana had carefully opened, aware that the wrong eyes could weaponize it. Anne read on, each line more personal than the last. Mentions of private conversations, fears Diana had never spoken of publicly, events Anne half-remembered now painted in a new light, but the words to her echoed louder than ever. Was it truly Anne Diana had meant? Or had she unknowingly opened a letter never intended for her? The ambiguity pressed on her like an unshakable question, yet Anne couldn't turn away. She couldn't put the letter back. The truth was unfolding, pulling her deeper into a story Diana never got to finish. Diana's private words about the monarchy. Anne hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until she finally exhaled. The room was silent, as if even the air knew not to disturb the moment. The note was more than just a personal message. It was a confession, a raw heartbeat of Diana's soul, woven with pain, hope, and caution. William is gentle, too gentle for the cage of expectation. Harry is bold. He'll fight the system if it tries to change who he is. But they're still boys, and I fear what tradition might do to them if no one stands up for their hearts. Anne's throat tightened as she read those words again. Diana wasn't attacking the monarchy. She was mourning how it shaped and sometimes crushed the people within it. There was no anger in her tone, only sorrow. A mother looking ahead, afraid for the future her children faced. I've made mistakes. I've spoken too loudly when I should have stayed quiet, and stayed silent when I should have screamed. But I see now how loneliness makes you do strange things. I don't want them to inherit that silence, not the kind that eats you alive behind gilded walls. Anne blinked back tears. This wasn't the tabloid version of Diana. This was the woman she remembered in fleeting moments, the one who stayed late after events to check on staff, who gave too much of herself to too many, a woman breaking under the weight of a crown she never truly wanted. Then came the names, few but meaningful. I trusted the Queen in my early years. She was fair, even when she wasn't warm. I trusted Margaret, though we rarely spoke. And you, Anne. I trusted you. Not because we were close, but because you saw me clearly without asking me to perform. That meant more than you'll ever know. Anne's lips parted in surprise. She hadn't expected to see her name there, yet seeing it in Diana's handwriting stirred something inside her. Maybe Diana had meant her all along, but the tone darkened. I feared the coldness in Charles's eyes. I feared what he might do to protect his image. I feared Camilla's patience, patient enough to outlast storms. But most of all, I feared what this institution would do to my sons, if it shaped them without love. Anne set the letter down for a moment, feeling the weight of the paper grow heavier. These weren't idle thoughts. They were dangerous truths that could create powerful enemies. Yet Diana hadn't left them for the world to see. She'd hidden them away, beneath velvet and pearls. She hadn't wanted ruin. She wanted to preserve something precious. Looking around the quiet room, Anne felt a chill creeping through the walls. This was more than a window into Diana's mind. It was a mirror reflecting the monarchy as seen through the eyes of someone it had both crowned and crushed. And Anne was only halfway through the letter. This was a confession only she could truly understand. Holding the letter closer, her hands steady despite the turmoil inside, Anne noticed the tone shifting. It was no longer the voice of a public figure writing for history. It had softened, becoming deeply personal and intimate. The letter said, "You were the only one who never asked me to explain myself. You never played politics with me, yet you saw everything. You always did." Anne blinked slowly, surprised by Diana's words. They had never been close in the usual way. Diana had once called Anne intimidating, and Anne had privately thought Diana was too emotional, too impulsive. But there had been fleeting moments of honesty, times when their differences created a quiet space for mutual respect. The letter went on. "I never told anyone this, not fully, but you were there. You remember that afternoon at Highgrove, don't you? The argument in the drawing room." Anne's breath caught. She did remember. One of those days best left buried. An unexpected visit. Raised voices. Diana storming down the hallway, eyes red and hands trembling. Anne had passed her in the corridor. They said nothing. They didn't have to. Diana wrote, "By then, Charles had already made his choice. I was waiting in the wings, just out of sight. I confronted him. I begged, not for love. I had let go of that long before. I begged him not to humiliate me, not in front of our children. He said nothing, just stared through me. That's when I knew I was no longer a person to him, just a problem to manage." Anne gripped the edge of the letter, her jaw tight. The memory, once blurred by time, was now vivid. The quiet footsteps, the lingering tension, Diana's disappearance for hours afterward. No one asked questions. They were royals. Silence was survival. But now Diana laid it all bare. "That day broke me," the letter said. "Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. And you, Anne, you were the only one who saw me afterward and didn't look away." Anne swallowed hard. She recalled passing Diana later that evening, wrapped in a shawl, sitting on a bench beneath the trees. Anne had stopped beside her, stood quietly, said nothing. Diana looked up with swollen eyes and whispered, "It's all happening, isn't it?" Anne had only nodded. They never spoke of it again until now. Anne looked down at the letter, feeling the weight of that unspoken moment. The truth Diana had buried wasn't just scandal or heartbreak. It was the loneliness of being invisible. And in that single moment, years ago, Anne had unknowingly acknowledged her pain. Now, through these words and memories, Diana was finally saying thank you. Carefully unfolding the last part of the note, Anne felt something beneath it shift. Tucked inside a thin silk pouch lay a delicate pearl necklace, 3 faintly shimmering strands with a tiny gold clasp shaped like a teardrop. It wasn't part of any royal collection. It wasn't grand or ceremonial. It was intimate and personal, almost too simple to be royal. Her fingers traced the pearls slowly. They were cool, light, and gently worn, clearly meant to be used, not just stored away. Anne glanced back at the final paragraph, its tone now soft and tender. "This necklace isn't just mine," Diana had written. "It was given to me during a season when I had nothing left to offer but my sadness. He gave it to me not for what I was to the world, but for who I was in silence. That was the first time I felt truly seen in years." Anne held the letter still, the weight of those words settling deep inside her. The word he hung heavily between the lines. Diana never named him, but Anne didn't need the name to understand. There had been whispers, quiet talks behind closed doors. Diana's relationships outside the royal family always sparked speculation, but Anne had never entertained those rumors, not out of loyalty to the crown, but out of respect for privacy. Now, the truth rested quietly in her hands. The pearls weren't about romance or rebellion. They symbolized identity. Diana reclaiming something fragile and beautiful amid her emotional turmoil. By placing the necklace in the box alongside the note, Diana had entrusted someone to understand her. Not judge, not expose, but simply understand. Anne blinked, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She hadn't cried like this in years. She wasn't the emotional type. She was steady, practical. But this wasn't about mourning Diana's death. It was about finally hearing her voice, raw and unfiltered, far from tabloids and history books. One line from the letter brought the tears fully to the surface. If you're the one holding this, then you were never as distant as they said. You were just the only one strong enough not to pretend. That's why I'm giving this to you. To carry, to remember, and maybe to heal some of what was broken in both of us. Anne laid the necklace in her palm, watching how the light caught each pearl. Diana hadn't chosen diamonds or sapphires. She chose pearls, the only gem formed through irritation and suffering. The metaphor was impossible to ignore. She pressed the necklace gently to her chest as if grounding herself. The weight was nearly nothing, but the meaning was everything. This wasn't a gift to keep, it was a story to protect. A final whisper from a woman the world never truly understood. And Anne, without fully knowing why, felt entrusted with something far more precious than crown or title. Diana's truth wrapped in pearls and silence, now passed to her. The question of telling William lingered. For 3 nights the necklace lay untouched on Anne's bedside table. Each evening she glanced at the 3 perfect strands, motionless yet somehow pulsing with unspoken meaning. The letter stayed folded inside her desk drawer, hidden from eyes that would never grasp its depth. But the words lived inside her, their weight echoing through every corner of her thoughts. She read the letter again, twice, slowly, not just to remember, but to understand. Diana hadn't explicitly asked for the message to be passed to William, but the unspoken meaning was clear. To my sons, and to her. Anne had become her. She accepted that now. The note had chosen her, not as a vault to hide secrets, but as a vessel to carry them. But how do you give your nephew a piece of his mother's pain, wrapped in memory and pearls? William was no longer a child. He was a husband, a father, a future king. But to Anne, he was still the quiet boy who once sat beside his mother on the Balmoral lawn, tugging at her sleeve, asking endless questions about why the clouds moved faster in Scotland. He carried the same sadness in his eyes now, only better hidden. Anne understood the power of restraint. It was the unspoken code she had lived by all her life. Emotions were managed, never displayed. Pain was dealt with behind closed doors, not shared through handwritten confessions. Yet something inside her shifted. This letter wasn't an invitation to gossip or reopen old wounds. It was a bridge from mother to son, from truth to healing. Still, the risk gnawed at her. What if the letter stirred up feelings William had finally come to terms with? What if it cast his father in shadows he wasn't ready to face again? Worse, what if it changed how he saw Anne, not as the aunt who respected silence, but as the bearer of ghosts? Then, one morning as she watched the sun rise over the fields, Anne remembered Diana's final line. Not everything needs to be shouted, but some things deserve to be heard by the right ears. She nodded quietly, her decision made. She wouldn't force the moment. She wouldn't present the letter with fanfare or ceremony. Instead, she would invite William quietly, privately, just the 2 of them, no titles between them. Not as Princess Royal and future king, but as 2 people who loved Diana in very different, very real ways. Anne called his private line and asked if he would like to come for tea at Gatcombe Park. No explanation, no agenda. William agreed without hesitation. The calmness in his voice reminded her of Diana. After hanging up, Anne looked at the pearl necklace one last time before carefully tucking it back into its pouch. The letter would come with it. She didn't know how William would respond, only that he deserved to hear his mother's words one last time. When William read the letter for the first time, the drawing room at Gatcombe Park was quiet, except for the soft crackle of the fire. Anne had chosen the space carefully, neutral, familiar, private. There were no staff nearby, no security within earshot. Just tea, a modest plate of shortbread, and the small velvet pouch resting on the side table. William arrived right on time. He greeted his aunt with warmth, polite but relaxed. Their conversations never involved drama, and Anne appreciated that. He didn't play games. He respected silence. Today, that was exactly what she needed. They exchanged light conversation for a few minutes. His children, the weather, a shared memory of riding ponies at Balmoral, but Anne's gaze kept drifting back to the letter folded inside the pouch. Finally, she reached for it and held it in her lap. "I found something," she said simply. "It belonged to your mother." William's expression shifted, not with alarm, but with quiet alertness, as if something inside him had straightened up. He nodded once, and Anne placed the letter gently into his hands. She said nothing more. No explanations. She let the words speak for themselves. He opened the letter slowly, as if sensing that what he was about to read deserved reverence. His eyes moved carefully over the first lines, and the silence between them grew heavier with each passing moment. Anne watched as his jaw tightened. His fingers curled gently around the edges, not in anger, but in quiet restraint. He paused halfway through, as if needing to steady himself, then continued, reading every word with the solemnity of someone who understood the weight of truth when it touches your skin. Then he reached the line that made him look up. "I fear what this institution will do to my sons if it is allowed to shape them without love." William's eyes met Anne's. There was no blame there, only a deep, haunting question. Did she really feel so alone? Anne nodded slowly. No words were needed. The answer was clear in her eyes. William looked back down at the letter, then at the necklace Anne had quietly placed beside him. He picked up the pearls, letting them slip through his fingers like droplets of time. His mother's scent, her fears, her secrets, all wrapped up in something so deceptively delicate. When he finished reading, he folded the letter carefully and held it in both hands. For a long moment he was silent, then softly said, "She was protecting us, even after all this time." Anne's chest ached. She had never heard William sound so young. He didn't ask to keep the letter. He didn't need to. He only asked one thing. "Will you keep it safe for me?" With steady eyes and a full heart, Anne answered, "Always." The jewelry box was locked once again. By the time William stood to leave, the afternoon sun was already dipping low. He had spoken little after reading, but his silence was full of understanding. Anne knew better than to press him. His eyes carried the weight of what he had just uncovered, layers of sorrow, memories, and something else. Resolution. He kissed her cheek gently before leaving, making the same request again. "Keep it safe for me. I'll know when it's time." Anne watched his car fade down the gravel driveway. The countryside settled into calm and quiet once more. She stood at the window a long time, holding the letter in one hand and the pouch in the other. The pearls felt even more fragile now, as if renewed by William's touch, not in any mystical way, but in the way that anything gains meaning when it becomes part of something living, something real. Returning upstairs to her room, Anne moved with a quiet reverence. The air in the house felt sacred, not because of ceremony, but because of truth. She opened the old jewelry box again, the one that had started it all. The faint scent of aged roses lingered, mingling now with a sense of closure. She unfolded the silk lining with deliberate care, almost like a ritual. The letter went in first, followed by the necklace. She smoothed the fabric back over them, pressing gently until the contents were hidden once more. It didn't feel like hiding. It felt like preserving, like placing a piece of time in a capsule, meant only to be opened when truly needed. Her hand lingered over the lid a moment longer before she closed it. The soft click of the latch sounded louder than expected, echoing through the stillness of the room. From her drawer, she pulled out a small brass key, the original one matching the old lock, and slowly turned it, sealing the box shut. Anne sat beside the box for a moment, not because she doubted what she'd done, but to make peace with it. This was more than just protection. It was an act of honor. Diana had chosen not to broadcast her pain to the world, but to whisper it into the quiet corners of memory. That choice deserved respect, and Anne now understood why she was the one to find it. Not because she was the most emotional, nor because she had something to prove, but because she could carry this burden without seeking attention or rewriting the story. She would let the words rest until the time was right. For now, they would sleep beneath velvet. Anne carefully placed the jewelry box back into the drawer it had come from, a space untouched for years, now sacred in a way few would ever understand. She switched off the lamp, letting the room fall into silence and a quiet farewell. Outside, the Scottish sky was overcast, clouds holding back their rain. Balmoral was calm and brooding, steeped in memory, just as it always was in late September. Anne had returned alone. No official event, no fanfare, just a quiet visit, exactly as she liked it, or perhaps needed it. That morning, she had dressed simply in muted tones. No brooch, no hat, but around her neck lay the pearl necklace. It rested softly against her collarbone, subtle yet weighty. As she fastened the clasp hours earlier in the mirror, it wasn't out of sentiment, but because she knew it was time. The walk to the garden took longer than she remembered. The gravel path had grown wild in places, and the roses had thinned with the coming cold, but the bench remained beneath the same tree where Diana used to sit, often barefoot, with a book, when she thought no one was watching. Anne had glimpsed her there a few times from the window but had never disturbed her. It was Diana's sanctuary, untouched by time. She sat down gently. The pearls shifted softly against her skin. She gazed up at the branches swaying overhead, the wind threading quietly through the leaves. For a long while she said nothing, just sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, letting the moment settle. Then, in a whisper barely carried beyond the stone path, she spoke. "I understand now, Diana." It wasn't a dramatic statement, nor was it meant to be. But within those 4 words lived decades of distance, missed moments, and things left unsaid between them. Anne wasn't apologizing, nor was she making promises, just finally acknowledging what had been there all along. She was acknowledging something far deeper, the truth Diana had entrusted to her. A truth Anne carried not just in her hands, but now in her heart. She gently touched the necklace. It didn't sparkle or catch the light, and it wasn't meant to. It was meant to remind, to hold memory quietly. "I never told you," Anne whispered, "but I saw how lonely you were. I just didn't know how to help." The wind stirred again, stronger this time, rustling dry leaves at her feet. Anne rose slowly and glanced down at the bench, half expecting to see Diana there, legs curled, eyes lost in thought. But the bench was empty. And maybe that was the point. This was no longer a place for grief. It was a place for memory and release. She walked back slowly, the necklace tucked beneath her collar. It wouldn't be worn again, not because it had lost meaning, but because its meaning had been fulfilled. Anne had kept her promise. Now, she was ready to let Diana rest. Some stories never make headlines, but they live on in the quiet choices of those who carry them. Princess Anne didn't just find a letter. She inherited a legacy of truth, pain, and love meant not for spectacle, but for safekeeping. By locking that jewelry box, she honored more than Diana's memory. She honored her voice. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold royal moments. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Anne's place? Sometimes, silence speaks louder than any crown ever could. Fatherhood shaped him more than any royal title ever could. In a rare moment of reflection, he said, "Becoming a dad changes everything. The highs are incredible, but the lows really test you. You're not the same man anymore, and that's a gift." He called George a cheeky little rascal who keeps him on his toes. Yeah, he's a little rascal, let's put it that way. He either reminds me of my brother or of me when I was younger. I'm not sure which. As for Charlotte, she's the heart of our home. But even in the joy, shadows remained. In a BBC interview, when asked about his fears, William paused. "Having kids," he said seriously, "makes you think a lot more about the kind of world you're leaving behind." He wanted their lives grounded in what really matters, not prestige or appearances, but values. "I don't want them chasing things that don't matter," he said. "The world already puts too much importance on the wrong stuff. I want them to know what really counts." And he teaches them, not with lectures but by example. Cleaning out the pet cages together, playing barefoot soccer in the backyard, telling bedtime stories in silly voices, laughing until their stomachs hurt, being there when words fail, always showing up. When asked which role meant the most to him, William's answer was immediate. Not king, not prince, but dad. Many might have expected a grander reply, but he knew the crown meant nothing without the people he loved beneath it. That morning, as he took George's hand and stepped into the unknown, he wasn't the Duke of Cambridge. He was a father, a calm presence, a steady foundation, and in George's eyes, he became something far beyond royalty. He became his hero. No headline or photograph could capture that quiet moment, but between a father's steady hand and a child's searching gaze lay a legacy no crown could define. So, what does news of a fourth child mean for the royal family? Keep watching to find out. A royal hope began quietly, just a whisper. No formal announcement, no flashing cameras, just a gentle ripple over tea tables, a soft murmur echoing through the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace. "Did you hear?" someone asked near Kensington's gates. "No, what is it?" "She's pregnant again." That was all it took to spark excitement. By noon, hearts worldwide were bursting with joy. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was reportedly expecting her fourth child. The news didn't come with breaking headlines or urgent alerts. Instead, it floated softly, like golden morning light, through whispers, private texts, and buzzing online threads. "She always shines," a fan tweeted, "but this glow is different." It had been an unusual year. By mid-2025, the royal family had already faced its share of storms, unspoken tensions, postponed appearances, and candid moments caught by eager cameras. Observers speculated and scrutinized, but this was untouched happiness, a rare spark. At a recent school event in Norfolk, subtle signs had already fueled rumors. The way William stayed just a step closer than usual, how Catherine's hand lingered on her coat a beat longer. Her smile was softer, not forced or formal, but genuine, as if she carried a secret too precious to share. "Is the rumor true?" a reporter asked a palace aide near the gates. The aide said nothing, only smiled knowingly. Then came the official confirmation. Quiet, but powerful. "The Prince and Princess of Wales are pleased to announce they are expecting their fourth child," the statement read. That was it. No reveal, no timeline, no health updates. But those few words set the internet on fire. "She'll be an amazing mother of 4, one commenter wrote on a fan page. "Her love grows with every child." Questions bloomed across tabloids and Twitter alike. Another boy to join Louis and all the royal mischief? Or a sister for Charlotte, someone to share secrets and braid ribbons in her hair? But the palace stayed silent. No hints, no clues. Only the king and queen spoke, simply saying, "We are thrilled. Every child is a blessing." Days later, William was spotted at a public service event, his joy impossible to hide. "She's doing well," he said softly. "How's the princess?" someone asked. "She's really doing well, thanks. Hopefully she's watching tonight and cheering me on. She's been amazing all year, and I know she'd want tonight to be a success. We're deeply grateful." That was all the world needed. A flicker of hope had returned, not through headlines or grand announcements, but in the quiet stirrings of new life waiting to bloom. Sometimes, the most meaningful beginnings come in silence. But this wasn't the end. Even amid all the pressure, a heartfelt gesture from Kate caught the public's attention once again, something the cameras almost missed. That June afternoon, the sun peeked through scattered clouds, casting a warm, golden glow over Buckingham Palace's stone facade. The air in London felt thick with anticipation, as if the whole city was holding its breath. This was no ordinary event. It marked the royal family's first time together on the palace balcony since trooping the color in summer 2023. Among the royals, all dressed in formal elegance, one figure seemed to shine differently: the Princess of Wales. Standing beside Prince William, she was as poised as ever, her smile calm yet gentle. But behind that composed exterior was a well of quiet strength and untold struggles. Her appearance was more than just ceremonial. It was a symbolic comeback after months of personal challenges. As the crowd erupted in applause and cameras clicked rapidly, a nearly invisible moment passed between her and William. It was so subtle that many might have missed it, but those paying close attention saw everything. William briefly turned his head, his eyes meeting hers, and something changed in her expression. Her smile, once soft, blossomed into a warmer, more radiant and intimate one, as if that single glance rekindled an unspoken bond. "That wasn't just a smile," said Nor Hibbert, a body language expert. "It told the story of everything they'd been through: pain, hope, connection." When she looked at him, her entire face softened. That's not royal protocol. That's love. Veteran royal photographer James Watling captured the moment perfectly. She looked at him, and you could see the change in her expression. It was genuine, nothing staged. That single photo tells a whole story: a return, a reunion, a testament to resilience. The image quickly spread across newspapers and social media. But for those who knew the couple's recent journey, it was far more than just grace and elegance. It was a symbol of endurance. Just days later, another photo touched hearts in a very different way. On Father's Day, the couple's official page shared a simple picture. In it, Prince William stood barefoot on a beach, laughing freely, while Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis clung to him with pure joy. The moment was raw and tender, accompanied by a handwritten note from the kids. "We love you, Papa. Happy Father's Day, G, C, and L." No press release, no royal seal, just honest love, quietly shared but speaking volumes. Flashback to early 2024, when Kate took a brave step, sitting quietly in a corner of Windsor to record a video that soon touched hearts worldwide. She didn't speak as royalty, but as a woman, a mother navigating her most vulnerable season. "William has been my rock," she said, her voice calm but clearly worn. "His presence has brought me peace in what's been anything but easy." Those few words said more than any lengthy speech. No theatrics, no embellishment, just truth and a glimpse into the private struggles shadowing them. Her mid-June update carried cautious hope. Though treatment would continue for months, she shared, "Some days are better. I find comfort in the everyday moments, school runs, helping with homework, slowly easing back into some work from home," she said. She didn't try to appear invincible. She didn't cast herself as a hero. She simply allowed herself to be real. Meanwhile, William stayed the quiet guardian. He returned to official duties, attended events, shook hands, smiled softly. Behind every polite nod and warm greeting was a man carrying the weight of love and worry. When asked, "How's Kate? How are the kids?" he always gave the same reply, "We're doing okay." That was it. But it was enough. Because in his calm voice there was always a flicker of emotion in his eyes, a softness that spoke of sleepless nights and tender mornings. Kate, in a message to the public, expressed deep gratitude. The kindness shown to them had been overwhelming. She wrote, "It has lifted our spirits more than we can say." It wasn't a political statement. It wasn't a polished thank you. It was simply a family saying, "We feel your love. We needed it. It helped." No fanfare, no stage, no plea for sympathy. Just grace in motion. A woman finding her strength again, and a man standing quietly beside her every step of the way. The world saw the photos. They read the statements. But it was the little things that spoke loudest. Their hands brushing, the ease in their shared glances, the protective way William guided her as they left the balcony. That small touch, his hand resting gently on the small of her back, might have gone unnoticed by most, but for those paying attention, it meant everything. It wasn't just affection. It was reassurance, a silent promise. "We're still here together." "We've faced hard days," Kate once said, "but we found strength in each other." And on that golden afternoon, as the royal family slipped back behind the glass doors, those words lingered in the air like a soft perfume. They had walked through the shadows, hand in hand. And in that, maybe lies their greatest legacy, the love that holds the monarchy together. The morning was still wrapped in the soft colors of dawn. The sky over Kensington was just starting to shift from blue to gold, while the rooftops lay quiet beneath the hush only early morning brings. But inside those historic palace walls, the day was already stirring. Tiny footsteps echoed, laughter chimed, and the delighted shrieks of children filled the grand hallways, sounds unexpected in a place steeped in history. This wasn't just any morning, nor just a palace. It was a home pulsing with warmth and life. At the heart of it all stood Catherine, Princess of Wales, not draped in majesty or royal splendor, but in gentle stillness. Her hair tucked neatly behind her ears, a peaceful smile soft on her lips. She stood quietly just inside the doorway, watching her children move about. No fanfare, no ceremony, just her quiet grace and grounded resilience shining through. "She has this amazing way of making everything feel normal," shared a palace staffer who has served the family for over a decade. "Even when the world's watching, she brings it all back to the simple things. The palace walls rarely keep secrets for long, but this one broke them wide open, shocking the world." Catherine, Princess of Wales, was moved to tears as news of a hidden fourth child surfaced publicly. Behind her calm smile lay months, maybe even years, of quiet sacrifice and silent pain. No one was meant to know. "Not like this," a royal aide whispered. Now, with the eyes of the world fixed on her and the monarchy swirling in rumors, questions are louder than ever. Why the secrecy? And what has Kate given up to keep it hidden? This marks the subtle start of a royal transformation. It didn't arrive with fanfare or a grand announcement. No velvet cloak or shining crown marked the moment. It all began with a simple, unexpected craving. thin pickles on toasted brown bread. Back in early 2013, during her first pregnancy, Catherine, then Duchess of Cambridge, sought small comforts while the world obsessed over her every move. Away from the relentless press, in her private quarters, she fought a hidden battle inside her own body, a struggle that would reshape how the world sees royalty and motherhood. "I was very sick, terribly sick," Catherine later revealed in an emotional interview. The royal household recently confirmed what many suspected. Another baby might be on the way. As rumors spread through Buckingham Palace halls and the media ignited speculation, memories returned to that fragile start when Kate, newly part of the royal family, embraced her most humbling role yet, a first-time mom. Through it all, Prince William stood by her side without wavering. "He looked so helpless," she shared. "There was pain in his eyes. He wished he could take it away, but he couldn't." Her illness was hyperemesis gravidarum, a severe form of morning sickness that left her incapacitated for days, sometimes weeks. Even standing up brought waves of crushing nausea. Eating was a struggle. Moving felt unbearable. Still, she kept going. "Even when I felt completely empty, my body carried a life that felt sacred," she whispered. In those weakest moments, she turned inward, searching for strength. What she found was hypnobirthing. It wasn't advice from royal counselors or some trending wellness fad. It was quiet, personal, and hers alone. "People think it's William whispering encouragement," she laughed softly. "But it was me, telling myself I could get through it." She embraced the practice fully, breathing differently, picturing her birth, calming her mind. Gradually, she rewrote the story in her head. Labor wasn't a hardship. It was her right. Experts like Naomi Wilson praised her bravery. "Hypnobirthing helps women reclaim their birth experience. It teaches them to trust themselves again," she said. But despite that inner strength, the sickness lingered like a dark cloud. "I wasn't glowing," Catherine admitted with a small shrug. "I just got through it." What kept her going were the little pleasures: avocados, buttered toast, warm tea, and especially one thing: curry. Not just any curry, but a lovingly prepared vegetable blend from a small wellness shop in her hometown of Bucklebury. Owned by a warm-hearted couple, Chan and Hash Shanadia, the shop became a quiet refuge. "She'd come in so softly," Hash remembered. "Always smiling, always thankful." She loved that curry. Sometimes her mom stopped by, sometimes her sister, but Kate always called it her little escape. That meal was more than just food. It was her comfort, a steady and familiar anchor amid the chaos. It was therapy. Picture this moment: a future queen curled up on a couch, spoon in hand, eyes closed over a bowl of warm spices and care. Far from flashing cameras and watching crowds, she was just a woman weathering a storm. And this raw, unfiltered side of her, that imperfect, genuine version, was what made millions connect with her. Over time, Catherine became known as someone unafraid to show her real self. She once admitted to re-wearing dresses at official events, not because she had to, but because she believed in it. "I just don't like waste," she said with a small smile. That honesty, that humility, made her relatable. She was the Duchess who worried about her speeches, stressed over her kids, craved pickles more than diamonds, and openly spoke about the hidden struggles women endure during pregnancy. "Pregnancy changes everything," she said during a talk on maternal health. "It doesn't just affect the mother. It touches everyone." She spoke about how deeply William felt the weight of it all. She remembered hearing his footsteps pacing outside the bathroom, his awful jokes that distracted her when even water was unbearable, his steady hand in hospital hallways and waiting rooms. He couldn't fix it, but he never gave up trying. She said those months of exhaustion and fear transformed their relationship, not just as royals, but as equals and soulmates navigating the unknown together. Then came that unforgettable July day in 2013. Crowds lined up outside the hospital. Reporters shouted. Camera flashes popped like fireworks. But inside the Lindo wing there was calm. A new mom, a proud dad, and their sleeping newborn son, Prince George, swaddled tight, his tiny face peaceful as he slept through the chaos. Catherine, still pale but glowing in a different way, stepped forward. She wasn't perfect. She wasn't putting on a show. She was real, and the world saw it. Gone were the days when royal women vanished through childbirth and returned untouched. She stood as living proof that motherhood, in all its raw honesty, belongs front and center, that women's stories deserve to be heard, and with that, she inspired countless mothers to share their own journeys. Now, as whispers about a fourth baby grow louder, fans wonder again. Will Catherine turn to hypnobirthing? Will the sickness return? Will she open the door for the world to follow her path once more? No one knows what the future holds. But one thing is sure. Whether curled up with a bowl of curry or leaning on William through the hard times, she will face it with the same quiet strength and grace she always has. Because that's who she is. A duchess not just by title, but by courage. A mother not only in blood, but in resilience. A woman whose struggles have become her true crown. "Pregnancy wasn't always easy for me," she once said, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "But I'm grateful for who I became because of it." And in that simple, honest truth, there's something far more beautiful than any royal jewel. But what part did Prince William play in all this? When a prince becomes a father, dawn breaks gently over London, the sky a soft silver, as if the world itself is holding its breath. Inside Kensington Palace, soft golden sunlight filtered through linen curtains, casting gentle shadows on the ornate frames and polished wood, a quiet blessing almost withheld. But the air inside was heavy, not with peace, but with tension. In the master bedroom, Catherine, Princess of Wales, lay still beneath the linen covers. Her hand rested weakly on top of the quilt, her skin nearly translucent against the ivory fabric. Her lips were dry, her breathing shallow. Her eyes fluttered open and caught the faint outline of the wall clock. But time had lost all meaning. Her body wasn't just tired, it was overwhelmed by relentless waves of sickness, cruel and unpredictable. Every breath was a struggle, and this morning, the burden felt too heavy. "Forgive me," she whispered, barely audible. "I should be the one going." From the shadows, Prince William stood quietly, crossing to her side without a word. He gently brushed his hand across her forehead, a touch filled with tenderness and quiet concern. "He knows you'd be there if you could. That's enough for him today," he said softly. She nodded, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. Outside the room, little Prince George waited in the hallway, dressed neatly in his new school uniform. His blazer fit perfectly on his small frame, his shoes polished, and his tie snug. But he lingered not for how he looked, but for the absence of his mom. "Mommy?" he called softly. As William stepped into view, George looked up, hopeful. "Is Mommy coming?" William knelt down to meet his son's eyes, placing a firm but gentle hand on his shoulder. "Mommy needs to rest today, but she really wanted to come, so it's just you and me, champ. Think we can handle that?" George hesitated, then nodded slightly. His wide eyes showed his nerves, but William smiled reassuringly. "As long as I'm holding your hand, you've got everything you need." With that, they stepped out. Just father and son, no fanfare, no guards, but quiet determination. The royal car hummed softly as it moved through the city. They took a discreet route, avoiding the crowds, but no amount of caution could keep the cameras away at Thomas's Battery. The car slowed to a stop. William stepped out first, smoothing his jacket with one hand and holding tightly to George's hand with the other. Immediately the clicking started, camera shutters, flashes, murmurs, but William remained steady. His whole world was right there beside him, small fingers gripping his own, eyes wide with cautious curiosity. Leaning down, William whispered, "It's okay to be nervous. I get nervous sometimes too. But you've got more courage than you know." George blinked and nodded. Together, they walked slowly through the gates. William let his son take a step ahead, giving him a small sense of independence while never letting go of his hand. When it was time to say goodbye, William crouched down again. No grand speech, just a few simple words that mattered. "You've got this. I'm already so proud of you." A teacher reached out, gently guiding George toward the school building. Just before he disappeared inside, George looked back one last time, eyes searching. William smiled and waved. "Go on," he mouthed. "I'll be right here when you're done." Later that afternoon, when reporters asked William about dropping George off, he let out a modest chuckle. "Honestly," he said, "there was another parent crying, and that actually made it a little easier for me. It was real, it was simple, it was human." Back at the palace, William returned to Catherine's side and recounted every detail. The strength of George's grip, the glance over his shoulder, the hesitant steps through the school gates. She listened closely, a faint smile touching her lips. "Was he brave?" she whispered. "Just like you," William replied, gently brushing her hair back. That day wasn't about royal duties, uniforms, or photo ops. It was about fatherhood, the quiet, steady kind, rooted in love. Later that year, in an interview, William shared something surprising. "I knew nothing about mental health," he admitted. "Not a thing. But Kate and I started realizing how important it really is, how big of an issue it actually is. We had to learn from scratch." It had been a busy few weeks for the new dad, but he'd finally sat down for his first interview since George's birth, and it was clear he was embracing fatherhood. They showed it not through flashy statements, but through deliberate actions, thoughtful talks, and a willingness to listen. After visiting a local school one afternoon, William came home visibly moved. "Some of those kids," he told a friend, "express their feelings better than most adults I know." That gave him hope and changed his perspective. He realized strength wasn't about being silent or stoic. It was about being whole, and he was determined to pass that lesson on to George, Charlotte, and Louis. At a football event, when asked about Charlotte, he chuckled, "She's got the kick already. Holding your hand one moment, sending the ball flying the next. She's got natural talent." Talking about having a daughter, he admitted, "I didn't grow up with sisters. Having Charlotte has opened my heart. It's different, but it's beautiful." That perhaps has always been Catherine's quiet superpower. Not in how she walks beside a future king or commands attention from a palace balcony, but in the way she nudges her kids awake with soft kisses, folds their tiny clothes with her own hands, and gently calls out each morning, "Time to get up, my loves." But recent months haven't been without storm clouds. One word, cancer, struck like lightning on a summer afternoon. Swift, jarring, cruel. It shattered the calm and rippled through the kingdom, the press, and the hearts of countless strangers who had come to admire her from afar. While many expected Catherine to step back, to retreat into stillness and silence, she did something completely different. She never once talked about stepping away, a close confidant revealed. Her first words were, "How can I be present for them through this?" It wasn't stubbornness. It was love in its purest form. Despite treatments that drained her and whispered talks behind closed doors, she chose again and again to stay fully present, for her husband, for her children, for the life they were quietly building together. "She never complains," a palace aide said softly. eyes gentle. She just keeps going. For them, for her little ones. George, Charlotte, and Louis, known to the public as young royals, but to her, simply her heart. Not symbols or heirs, just kids with grass-stained pants, pillow fights, and bedtime giggles. And to Catherine, they are everything. No matter where she was, her eyes always sought them out. Her arms never hesitated, even when exhausted. Her heart never wavered, stretching wide enough to hold them all. But she wasn't alone in this. Standing beside her, not overbearing but solid, was William, the man the world calls the future king. But to her, and to their children, he was simply a father, a partner, a friend. "Whatever happens outside these walls," he once said during a hospital visit, "my family is my anchor. They come first, always." And he's lived up to that promise. Not with grand speeches, but through quiet, steady acts of devotion. School drop-offs, midnight sicknesses, cheering from the sidelines at soccer games, whispering encouragement before dance recitals. He shows up. When George was born in July 2013, time seemed to pause. Cameras focused, the world leaned in. But William's world shrank to the tiny bundle in his arms. It felt like everything else disappeared, he once told a close friend. 2 years later, on a crisp spring morning, Charlotte arrived, called the monarchy's darling, but to William, simply his daughter, who captured him with a single blink. Then came Louis in 2018, with a smile as mischievous as it was heartwarming. "He's quite the character," William joked. "Keeps us on our toes but fills our days with laughter." In a rare, candid moment, William admitted, "Becoming a dad changes you. You start seeing the world differently. Everything is about making it better for them." Now whispers swirl again. Quiet glances, subtle touches. Is another child on the way? No confirmations, no big announcements, just the language of touch. William's hand resting instinctively on Catherine's back, her fingers brushing her belly with gentle care. "You see it?" a seasoned royal photographer said. "It's in the way they share looks, like there's a secret blooming between them." Maybe there is. Catherine continues to handle royal duties with grace. Galas, charity work, all carried out with calm poise. But it's in the quiet moments, the everyday spaces, where her true light shines. When she parts Charlotte's hair with practiced fingers, ties Louis's shoes carefully, or leans in to help George with tough homework, that's where her brilliance lives. She never wanted the spotlight, a family confidant shared. It's always been about the kids, their dreams, their peace. William, too, shows his real self in life's smallest moments, crouching to listen to Charlotte's stories, spinning Louis around just to hear his infectious laugh, walking beside George at his own pace, not rushing but matching his steps. These aren't moments staged for the cameras, they're the heart of their family. Their moments are raw, honest, and rooted in love. And maybe that's their greatest legacy. In a home steeped in centuries of tradition and weighed down by royal expectations, William and Catherine have created something rare and real, not a spectacle, but a family. The world may admire them for their lineage, the tiaras, the rituals, and inherited power, but what people truly cherish is their humanity. The way William watches his children with wonder, the way Catherine's fingers gently hold theirs, and how they've transformed a palace into a place of tenderness, a sanctuary where love speaks louder than legacy. So, if there is indeed a new baby on the way, it won't just be another headline. It will be one more heartbeat to cherish, another source of joyful chaos, a new voice in bedtime stories, and a fresh pair of hands to hold during morning cuddles. And once again, curious eyes will peer through Kensington's towering windows. But what those eyes will see won't be a pageant or a symbol of royal pomp. they'll see a family wrapped in laughter and bound together by devotion. That said, one detail has sparked much curiosity: the timing and way the news was shared. Will the public continue to support Kate, or will criticism begin? Kate's healing journey and whispers of a fourth child stirred deep emotions. It was March, and the world stood still. The Princess of Wales sat before a simple backdrop, her voice calm, her gaze soft but determined. "In January, I underwent major abdominal surgery in London," she shared. "At the time, it was believed my condition was non-cancerous. However, tests after the operation showed cancer was present. My medical team advised that I undergo preventative chemotherapy, and I am now in the early stages of treatment." This wasn't just a royal statement. It was the voice of a mother, a wife, and a woman who had spent over a decade in the public eye. In that moment, Catherine wasn't just a princess. She was every woman who's ever been blindsided by a diagnosis and forced to face uncertainty with grace. Then came the whispers, soft at first, hesitant. Could there be another child? A fourth heartbeat to join George, Charlotte, and Louis? For some, the idea was shocking. For others, it was tender. But it spread across headlines, sparking both hope and criticism. This wasn't the Kate of 10 years ago. This was a woman enduring chemotherapy, balancing motherhood, royal duties, and the delicate act of maintaining privacy in the public eye. Still, the question lingered. If Catherine were to have a fourth child, it would be a deeply personal decision, said royal commentator Emily Andrews. It's not about the crown or tradition, it's about healing, family, and legacy within the royal household. Such a birth would alter the line of succession. Prince George would remain second in line after his father, William, followed by Princess Charlotte, then Prince Louis. A fourth child would slot in fifth, ahead of Prince Harry and his children. Another twist in the already complex modern monarchy. But as palace insiders murmured, this wouldn't be about titles or ranks, it would be about completeness. But what kind of child would they be? If it's a boy, biographer Katie Nicole speculated, he might inherit William's quiet charisma or Kate's grounded warmth. If a girl, maybe she'll carry Diana's gentleness paired with her mother's poise. Either way, this child would grow up surrounded by love, not just royal duty. Royal watchers debated everything, from looks to personality traits. Would this child have George's sense of responsibility, Charlotte's quiet confidence, Louis's playful spark, or something entirely new? Perhaps a unique magic that only a fourth child born amid crisis could bring. One insider shared, "Kate once said her children are her heart. If she decides to have another, it would be a powerful sign that hope still lives in her, despite everything she's faced." But not everyone greeted the news warmly. Critics quickly took to social media, questioning the timing. "She just finished chemo. How is this safe?" one post read. "Is this responsible?" asked another. The criticism was sharp and unforgiving. Yet in the same digital space, love blossomed. Supporters rallied with compassion. "If anyone can decide what's best for her body, it's Kate," one mother wrote. "She's strong and deserves happiness." Another added, "After all she's been through, if she wants another child, that should be celebrated, not questioned." Doctors, too, offered cautious optimism. "Chemotherapy can affect fertility long-term," said oncology specialist Dr. Hannah Wilcox. "But it's not definitive. Every woman's body reacts differently. With proper care and time, it's not impossible." Kate, ever quiet about her struggles, never addressed the rumors directly. But those close to her noticed a subtle change. She was smiling more, walking farther, laughing louder with her children. "William, always the watchful protector, seemed calmer too," said a palace aide. "It's like they're standing at the edge of something beautiful. There's a calm about them, not because the storm's passed, but because they've found a rhythm in the chaos." For William, a fourth child would mean more than just a new family member. It would be a second chance. The trauma of losing his mother at such a young age never left him. "He wants to be the parent Diana wanted to be," said friend Tom Bradby, present, loving, and human. To raise a child born in the wake of pain, beneath global headlines and personal trials, would be his quiet redemption. As summer faded, Kate was spotted once again holding Louis's hand in a park. Her smile was lighter, her scarf carefully wrapped around her hair. Reporters noticed her glow, and the public leaned in, wondering. Nothing was confirmed. Nothing denied. And maybe that's exactly how it should be. "If there is a child," author Ingrid Seward said, "let the world hear when they're ready to share, not a moment before." Behind these tender scenes lies a heavier burden for William, the real test of whether he can carry it with the same grace he shows at home. That day by the shore, the wind played mischievously, tugging at hair, ruffling clothes, whistling like a child at play. Waves rhythmically lapped at their feet. But it wasn't the ocean stealing the show. All eyes were on Prince William, the heir to the British throne, holding the hands of his 3 children as they leapt into the salty air, perfectly in sync. Their laughter echoed across the coastline. The photo Catherine took in the summer of 2024 for William's birthday was much more than just a keepsake. It was a glimpse into the heart of a father. No royal attire, no grand palace backdrop, just nature, raw and real, and the pure joy shining from his face. A simple, authentic moment of fatherhood. One viewer said, "This is the most beautiful royal photo I've ever seen. No diamonds, just devotion." For William, moments like this weren't new. They were just rarely shared with the public. As far back as 2016, William opened up in a heartfelt interview. "Yes, I was born a prince," he said. "But before all that, I'm a dad. My greatest goal is to raise kind, compassionate kids." He wasn't seeking applause. His words came from deep inside, a genuine commitment to being present, hands-on, emotionally grounded. Unlike many monarchs before him, William doesn't separate his royal duties from parenting. He blends them naturally. "People might forget my speeches or awards," he once said quietly, "but my kids won't forget if I was there when they needed me, and I am always there." During an informal visit to Woodgate Valley Urban Farm, he casually mentioned they have guinea pigs at home. When asked who takes care of them, he smiled. "Honestly, that's me doing the cleaning. They're high-maintenance pets, but I don't mind. Even future kings get their hands dirty." Back in July 2013, spectators at a cricket game noticed William sitting with Prince George. No security crowding them, no posed smiles. Just a dad and son sharing pizza, cracking jokes, reacting naturally to the game. A woman nearby said, "They were just like any father and son." That authenticity is what William works hard to protect, not just for George, but for Charlotte and little Louis too. In a candid interview with British GQ, he said, "I want my kids to grow up in the real world, not behind palace gates, where laughter drowns out camera clicks." There was steel in his voice, a clear message from a father on a mission. Behind that determination is a deeper influence, his late mother, Princess Diana. Known for being hands-on, kneeling to kids' level, embracing AIDS patients, spinning through palace halls with her sons, William carries her spirit with him. At the big help-out event during King Charles III's coronation, William didn't just pose for photos. He brought Louis along, and the two were spotted operating an excavator together. A young prince handling heavy machinery next to his dad. A volunteer later said, "That wasn't for the cameras. It was a father teaching a life lesson." Give back. Get involved. Don't be afraid to dig deep. Those lessons carry on in their daily lives. At bedtime, after the day's noise fades, William reads to Louis. One favorite book is Homewards, the story of a boy helping a homeless woman. But for William, it's more than just a story. He once said, "If I can teach my son to truly feel empathy, then I've succeeded." His voice cracked just a bit, proof of how deeply he meant it. It's these quiet, tender rituals that hold their family together, not fancy events or grand banquets, but sandy toes, laughter over pizza, muddy paws, and bedtime stories. Still, life in the spotlight comes with constant challenges. The press doesn't always respect their boundaries. William has spoken out against that, especially when it threatens his kids' privacy. "They're not performers," he said firmly in a rare media statement. "They deserve a chance to be kids, to make mistakes, to grow up without being on display." When the pressure mounts, he doesn't retreat into royal walls. Instead, he leads his family outdoors, to wild spaces, to laughter and freedom, where they can simply be themselves. That's why that beach photo meant so much. It wasn't about the location or the occasion. It reflected William's truest self. He's raising his kids with freedom, a royal expert said, but also with values that ground them. William doesn't parade his role as a dad, he just lives it. One overlooked moment captures this perfectly. During a school run, a photographer caught William kneeling beside Louis, fixing his collar and whispering something in his ear. Louis beamed with a big grin. The photo quietly carried the caption, "Tomorrow's king, today's father." William never pretends to be perfect. He jokes about his flaws, does the chores no one sees, and stands steady through life's storms. His future kingdom may be vast, and his list of titles may grow. But when asked what matters most, he's already given the only answer that counts. More than anything, I want my kids to know they're loved. And by all accounts, they do. What do you think? How will Beatrice react when the truth about the paternity comes out? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.